The deep, mechanical groan of the massive granite door wasn't just a sound. It was a physical vibration that resonated in the very marrow of Silas's bones. The golden light spilling from the ancient geometric carvings cut through the absolute darkness of the unmapped Tartarian catacombs like a hot knife through black wax. For a moment, neither the immortal predator nor the human scavenger dared to breathe. The air in the cavern was thick with the suffocating dust of the collapsed cistern above, smelling sharply of vaporized concrete, burnt synthetic coolant, and the ozone discharge of the destroyed Celestial Network containment unit. But beneath those harsh modern scents, another odor was beginning to bleed into the atmosphere, something incredibly old. It smelled of petrichor, oxidized bronze, and a metallic tang that Silas instinctively recognized as dried blood. Silas remained completely frozen on the cold stone floor, his hands still clutching the frayed canvas straps of his satchel. Above them, hundreds of feet of pulverized rubble completely sealed off any hope of returning to the low sector slums. They were entombed. To anyone else, this would have been a suffocating grave. But as Silas stared at the towering granite slab illuminating the darkness, he realized this wasn't a tomb at all. It was a doorway to a world the ruling elites had spent centuries trying to erase. The vampire stood perfectly still in the golden glow, his tall, imposing silhouette casting a long, monstrous shadow against the cavern wall. His tattered cloak hung in ruined shreds from his broad shoulders, and the deep laceration across his forearm continued to slowly weep a thick, dark golden fluid that defied human biology. Yet, he seemed entirely oblivious to his wounds. His crimson eyes were locked onto the circular indentation in the exact center of the vault door. Beneath his torn shirt, the jagged, terrifying scar across his chest was no longer just pulsing, it was violently vibrating. The heat radiating from his own flesh was staggering, mirroring the exact thermal signature of the golden runes carved into the rock. It was a symbiotic resonance. The ancient vault recognized the bloodline of the one standing before it, and it was desperately calling out to its master. 500 years, the vampire whispered, his voice a gravelly, tectonic rumble that seemed to command the very stone around them. 500 years I have crawled through the subterranean sewage of this city, dodging psychic sweeps and mechanical angels, believing this place was forever lost beneath the foundations of the corporate network's great synthetic domes. Silas slowly pushed himself up to a kneeling position, his joints popping in protest. His fingers reached into his satchel, withdrawing the tarnished, cylindrical data capsule he had stolen from the upper excavation site. In the golden light of the door, the capsule looked entirely different. The grime and copper wiring that Silas thought were cheap corporate modifications were actually a sophisticated, ancient locking housing. "You're saying this thing?" Silas started, his voice cracking from the thick dust in his throat. He cleared it, forcing himself to sound stronger. "You're saying this capsule isn't corporate legacy hardware? The enforcers tore apart 3 city blocks looking for this. I thought it was a data archive from before the Great Alignment." Vampire finally tore his gaze away from the door, turning his glowing red eyes down to the youth. The sheer weight of his immortal presence was suffocating. "The corporate network and the celestial elites are parasites, Silas. They do not create, they only scavenge and repurpose. When they overthrew my kind centuries ago, they didn't just kill us. They stole our architecture. They took the grand, golden domes of the Tartarian era and strapped neon lights and cybernetic broadcast towers to them, calling it their own divine creation. They did the same to our relics." The vampire took a slow, deliberate step towards Silas. Golden light caught the sharp angles of his pale face, highlighting a profound, ancient sorrow that lay buried beneath his eternal paranoia. "That cylinder you hold is not a hard drive," the vampire explained, gesturing to the object in Silas's trembling hands. "It is an astrolabe, a blood-sealed key forged by the original sires of my lineage. The corporate elites found it buried in the ruins and wrapped it in synthetic copper and digital interfaces, desperately trying to hack its internal geometry. They knew it unlocked a vault of immense power, but their machines could never read the code. Their algorithms only understand binary logic. They do not understand the frequency of a soul." Silas looked down at the cylinder, his mind reeling. He was a creature of the neon slums, a boy who had survived his entire life by understanding the flow of corporate data, the patrol routes of security drones, and the value of scavenged circuit boards. Magic, bloodlines, and ancient immortals were supposed to be myths, ghost stories the elites broadcast on the holographic propaganda streams to keep the human populace terrified and compliant. Yet here he was, holding a magical key while an actual vampire bled golden ichor beside him. "You chose the path of the mind, Sealers," the vampire said softly, his voice dropping into a solemn, almost fatherly cadence. "This is your first lesson. The truth of this world is not digital. It is visceral. Bring the key to the door." Sealers swallowed hard. His legs felt like lead, but the unyielding fire of rebellion that had kept him alive this long pushed him forward. He stood up, clutching the cylinder to his chest, and walked toward the towering granite slab. Up close, the door was even more massive. The geometric carvings were intricate, forming a sprawling, interconnected web of constellations that Sealers had never seen in the polluted, neon-choked night sky of the city above. "Place it in the center," the vampire instructed, stepping up right beside the boy. The unnatural winter-like chill radiating from the immortal's skin was a stark contrast to the burning heat emanating from the door. Sealers raised his hands. His arms were shaking, completely exhausted from the adrenaline crash of surviving the thermal explosion. He aligned the heavy, tarnished cylinder with the deep circular indentation in the center of the granite door. It was a perfect, seamless fit. As the cylinder slid into the stone, a heavy, metallic click echoed through the cavern. Nothing happened. The golden light continued to glow, but the door remained completely sealed. "It's not turning," Sealers panicked slightly, gripping the edges of the cylinder and trying to force it clockwise. It wouldn't budge. "Is the mechanism jammed? Did the corporate enforcers damage the housing when they tried to hack it?" "It is not a mechanical lock, Sealers," the vampire replied quietly. "It requires a password. And the password must be spoken in a language the weakened gods cannot replicate." Before Sealers could ask what he meant, the vampire raised his injured right arm. He didn't hesitate. With a swift, brutal motion, he bit down on his own wrist, his elongated fangs piercing the pale flesh. Sealers flinched backward as the vampire pulled his wrist away, revealing a deep puncture wound that instantly began to flow with thick, glowing crimson blood. It was completely different from the golden healing ichor from his previous injury. This was the raw, untainted life force of an ancient predator. The vampire pressed his bleeding wrist directly against the top of the cylinder. The reaction was instantaneous. The moment the immortal blood touched the tarnished metal, the cylinder absorbed the liquid like a sponge. The ancient, faded runes carved into the sides of the key suddenly flared to life, burning with a blinding, ruby-red intensity. The geometric constellations carved across the entire surface of the massive vault door shifted color, turning from a warm gold to a deep, violent crimson. A sound like an earthquake tearing through the center of the earth violently shook the catacombs. Sealers was thrown to his knees, clapping his hands over his ears as the sheer acoustic pressure threatened to burst his eardrums. Deep within the stone, massive internal tumblers, gears the size of city blocks, began to grind and rotate. The vampire didn't move. He stood perfectly upright, his chest heaving as the scar across his collarbone burned with a ferocity that threatened to tear his mind apart. He closed his eyes, fighting a desperate losing battle against the rising tide of his own trauma. As the heavy granite door slowly began to split down the middle, separating with a deafening groan, the vampire's consciousness was violently ripped backward in time. He wasn't standing in the dark, dusty catacombs anymore. In his mind, he was back in the height of the Great Alignment. The vault door was open, but the chamber wasn't dark. It was illuminated by thousands of floating, ethereal candles. He was standing on the polished black marble floor laughing. He was laughing with him, Kalen, his brother in arms, the first mortal he had ever offered the gift of eternal life. Kalen, with his bright, ambitious eyes and his infectious smile. They had fought side by side to protect the relics from the encroaching tech syndicates who sought to replace magic with machines. But then, the laughter had stopped. The memory shifted, warping into a nightmare of horrific clarity. The vampire felt the sudden, agonizing coldness of the blade before he even saw it. He looked down and saw the relic weapon, the very blade he had sworn to protect, plunged directly through his own chest, the jagged tip protruding from his back. He looked up, coughing dark blood, and saw Kalen's face. The ambitious eyes were gone, replaced by the cold, synthetic yellow glow of a corporate ocular implant. The elites hadn't beaten Kalen, they had simply bought him. They promised him a seat among the weakened gods, a throne in the new neon sky, in exchange for the life of the last true vampire sire. The sheer agony of the betrayal was infinitely worse than the physical wound. As Kalen violently ripped the blade free, leaving the permanent, jagged scar that would haunt the immortal for eternity. The vampire had fallen to the cold marble floor, watching as the door to his sanctuary was sealed shut, burying him alive in his own fortress. "Hey, hey, look at me, we're in." Silas's frantic voice shattered the flashback, violently pulling the vampire back to the present. The immortal gasped, his eyes snapping open. The red glow of the runes illuminated the heavy sweat pouring down his pale face. His breathing was ragged, his fangs fully extended in a primal display of defensive aggression. He looked down and saw Silas staring at him, genuine concern etched across the boy's dirt-streaked face. The vampire forced his fangs to retract, swallowing the bitter taste of a 500-year-old betrayal. He nodded slowly, regaining his composure. "I am here, Silas, I am here." He turned his attention back to the door. The massive granite slabs had parted, revealing a passageway into pitch-black obscurity. A rush of stale, freezing air poured out of the vault, carrying the heavy scent of static electricity and old blood. Without a word, the vampire stepped through the threshold, his dark silhouette swallowed by the gloom. Silas quickly scrambled to his feet, tightening his grip on the strap of his satchel, and hurried after him, terrified of being left alone in the dark. As they stepped into the chamber, the ambient resonance of the vampire's blood interacting with the room triggered the ancient defense mechanisms. Slowly, one by one, massive braziers lining the perimeter of the room ignited with a low, smokeless blue flame. Silas let out a breathless gasp of pure awe. The vault was staggering in its scale. It was a massive, perfectly spherical chamber carved entirely out of seamless black obsidian. Towering statues of ancient vampire sires lined the walls, their faces carved with expressions of regal, terrifying authority. Each statue held a massive stone broadsword pointed downward, creating a perimeter of silent, immortal guardians. The ceiling, hundreds of feet above, was a perfect domed replica of the night sky, with actual glowing gemstones embedded in the rock to represent the forgotten constellations. It was a cathedral of shadows, untouched by the corruption of the neon city above. But it was the center of the room that commanded all attention. Rising from the polished obsidian floor was a jagged, asymmetrical pedestal of pure white marble, and resting atop the pedestal, suspended in a localized anti-gravity stasis field, was the relic. The vampire stopped 10 feet away, his entire body rigid. It wasn't a sleek, glowing cybernetic weapon like the elites wielded. It was terrifying in its raw, primal brutality. The weapon was a massive, two-handed greatsword forged from a single, unbroken piece of midnight black meteoric glass. The blade was jagged and asymmetrical, looking more like a violently shattered shard of a dying star than a traditional sword. But what made it truly terrifying was the core. Running down the center of the black glass was a thick, pulsing vein of crystallized crimson light. It looked like a living artery, throbbing in perfect synchronization with the ragged scar on the vampire's chest. "The Eclipse Blade," the vampire whispered, the name carrying the weight of a religious sacrament. "Forged in the blood of the first sire, quenched in the vacuum of the void. It does not cut flesh, Silas. It severs the connection between a soul and the synthetic machines that bind it. It is the only weapon on this earth capable of permanently killing a cybernetic god." Silas stared at the massive weapon, realizing the sheer scale of the war they were about to start. "Can you wield it?" the boy asked, his voice echoing softly in the massive chamber. After whatever happened to you in here, can you take it back?" The vampire looked down at his own trembling hands. He could feel Kalen's phantom blade tearing through his chest all over again. The trauma was a living, breathing chain wrapped around his throat. For 5 centuries, he had hidden in the dark, convincing himself that survival was enough. But survival wasn't living. Survival was just a slower way to die. He looked at Silas, a fragile mortal human who had willingly thrown himself at an invincible machine just to protect a stranger. If a scavenger from the dirt could find the courage to fight the heavens, the last king of the shadows had no excuse. "Survival ends today," the vampire declared, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying authority. He stepped up to the marble pedestal. He didn't hesitate. He reached into the stasis field and wrapped his pale, heavily scarred hands around the hilt of the Eclipse blade. The moment his skin made contact with the weapon, the crystallized crimson vein inside the glass violently shattered its stasis. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated magical energy exploded outward from the blade. It hit Silas like a physical wall, throwing the boy onto his back. The blue flames in the braziers flared into blinding pillars of crimson fire. But the shockwave didn't stop in the vault. The invisible pulse of ancient, immortal energy tore upward through the earth. It shattered the granite ceiling, bypassed the ruined cistern, and slammed directly into the sprawling foundation of the neon city above. Instantly, the massive, holographic propaganda billboards illuminating the night sky short-circuited in a shower of sparks. The heavy blue cybernetic scanning grids that policed the low sector flickered and died. For exactly 3 seconds, the entire corporate network was plunged into absolute, terrifying darkness, miles above the catacombs, at the absolute apex of the highest, silver-plated Gothic spire overlooking the city. A pair of synthetic, piercing white eyes suddenly snapped open. Suspended in a web of glowing fiber-optic cables, the Supreme Commander of the Celestial Network, a terrifying fusion of a heavily armored archangel and an advanced combat chassis, felt a sensation it had not experienced in 500 years. Fear, anomaly confirmed, the archangel whispered, its voice a horrific blend of a celestial choir and grinding metal gears. The last king has drawn his blade. Wake the Seraphim Guard. We are going to war.